The swarm I remember best did not leave a crowded hive. It left a hive that still had room above the brood nest, an empty super on top, and not one obvious queen cell when I inspected it. 10 days later, half the bees were hanging 40 feet up an elm tree, while I stood below holding a ladder that was too short. I had given that colony more space. What I had not given the queen was useful space where she was already trying to lay. That difference cost me most of a spring honey crop, and it taught me that swarm control begins before a colony looks crowded. I am Walt Dunmore. I have kept bees for more than 50 years, and today I will show you how I open a strong brood nest before the colony commits to leaving. The rule is simple. Do not wait for queen cells to tell you the colony has made its decision. Beekeepers understood this long before modern plastic equipment and weekly online forecasts. Old swarm control bulletins spent pages discussing brood nest congestion, laying room, ventilation, and the timing of spring manipulation. Their language was different, but the practical question was the same one we face now. Can the queen continue expanding where nurse bees are already organized to support brood? A super above the brood chamber may contain 10 empty frames and still do little for a queen whose laying area is boxed in by honey, pollen, or undrawn foundation. Bees do not measure the hive with a ruler. They respond to conditions inside the living center of the colony. In spring, the queen's laying rate rises, new workers emerge, and the cluster expands. Nurse bees crowd the brood surface, while incoming nectar begins occupying polished cells faster than the queen can use them. A frame can look half-empty to us, while its useful brood cells are already broken into narrow islands by pollen and fresh nectar. The colony may still have physical volume, yet the brood nest begins to feel closed. Queen pheromone is distributed through a larger population. The balance of worker ages changes, and preparations for reproduction can begin. By the time polished queen cups contain eggs, the easy preventive window may already be closing. That is why adding a super after swarm cells appear often disappoints people. The equipment solves a storage problem, but the colony is already solving a reproductive problem. Swarming is not a mechanical failure. It is normal honeybee biology. We are not trying to defeat it forever. We are trying to recognize the season when a production colony is most likely to commit. My mistake was believing empty space anywhere in the hive was equal to empty drawn comb beside active brood. It is not. Foundation is a promise of future space. Drawn comb is space the queen can use today. But opening a brood nest is not a trick to use on every colony. Done too early, too aggressively, or during cold weather, it can divide a cluster that is struggling to keep brood warm. Strong colony, settled weather, drawn comb, no swarm commitment. Those 4 conditions matter more than a date on the calendar. I begin watching colonies as spring brood reaches several frames and daytime flight becomes steady. I am not looking for the first warm afternoon. I am looking for sustained growth. A candidate colony has bees covering the brood area densely, brood in several stages, enough stores to support expansion, and a queen laying a coherent pattern. A weak colony, a colony recovering from queen trouble, or a colony with chilled or patchy brood needs diagnosis and support, not extra gaps in its brood nest. Weather is the second test. I want mild nights and a forecast that does not threaten a hard, cold return immediately after I open the cluster. Local timing matters. My spring calendar cannot safely be copied by a beekeeper several hundred miles north at higher elevation or in a coastal climate. The bees and the forecast decide. The printed date only reminds me to start looking. Observe the colony, not the calendar. I remove the outer cover and begin from the edge. Before moving anything, I find the actual boundaries of the brood nest and note where the queen has been laying most recently. I look for a frame near the brood edge that is mostly capped brood and close to emergence. Emerging brood soon releases cells and adds young workers without leaving a large area of delicate larvae exposed. I also locate one frame of clean, empty, fully drawn worker comb. It must be healthy equipment with a known history, not an unknown dark frame borrowed from another yard. If the empty comb contains syrup, nectar, or a heavy band of pollen, it is not truly empty laying space. I choose another frame or wait. I never use bare foundation as though it were equivalent. A strong colony may draw foundation quickly during a flow, but the queen cannot lay in cells that do not exist. The first adjustment is modest. I move one suitable frame of mostly capped brood toward the outside edge of the brood nest while keeping it in contact with bees and warmth. Then I place one frame of empty drawn comb beside the active laying area, not in the dead center of a small cluster. The goal is not to scatter brood like playing cards. The goal is to create one usable lane into which the queen and nurses can expand naturally. In a very strong double brood box, the exact position will depend on where the queen and brood actually are. Box labels matter less than preserving a connected, warm brood area. I close the hive and record the change. One drawn frame inserted, one capped frame shifted, date, weather, and colony strength. 7 days later, I inspect the inserted comb. If the queen has laid into it and bees cover it well, the colony has accepted the new lane. If the comb remains empty while nectar is packed around the brood, I do not blindly repeat the move. I ask whether the colony is queen-right, whether the flow has changed, and whether swarm preparation has already started. If I find charged queen cells, the management problem has changed. I stop pretending an empty frame alone will erase a decision the colony has already made. At that point, I use an appropriate swarm management plan, a controlled split, a nucleus, a queen management method, or another procedure suited to the colony and my goals. Breaking every queen cell and walking away is not a plan. Bees can rebuild cells, hide one on the edge of a frame, or swarm before the next inspection. Prevention happens before commitment. Management happens after. On exceptionally powerful colonies, I may repeat a careful expansion later, but only after confirming the first frame is occupied and the weather remains favorable. I do not open the brood nest on a fixed weekly schedule. Each new gap increases the area bees must cover and heat. The colony tells me whether the previous change worked. My notebook keeps me from turning one successful manipulation into a harmful habit. This is also why I keep spare drawn comb. During the honey flow, it may look less exciting than another full super, but in spring, one clean drawn frame can be more useful than an entire box of foundation. Drawn comb is spring insurance. I store it protected from wax moths, rodents, moisture and contamination. Equipment that smells wrong, carries suspicious scale, or comes from an uncertain disease history does not enter a healthy brood nest. Never solve congestion with unknown comb. The first common failure is acting too early. 4 small brood frames, surrounded by a thin population, are not a strong spring colony merely because the afternoon is warm. Separating that modest cluster with empty comb before a cold night can force bees to abandon brood on one side. What was meant to accelerate growth can delay it. The second failure is acting too late. If queen cells are charged and the queen has already slimmed down, the colony may be much closer to departure than the beekeeper realizes. More empty equipment above them does not rewind the biological clock. The third failure is using foundation instead of drawn comb. Foundation can be valuable, but it requires wax production, warmth, carbohydrates, and enough young bees to build it. During poor weather or a weak flow, foundation can sit untouched while the brood nest continues tightening. The fourth failure is making too many changes at once. Moving several brood frames, reversing boxes, adding foundation, splitting the nest, and changing the entrance leaves no clear way to learn what helped. Make one defensible adjustment, record it, and inspect the result. The fifth failure is ignoring genetics. Some colonies are simply more inclined to swarm than others, even under similar management. I record which queens repeatedly prepare to swarm and which colonies remain productive with reasonable room. Over years, those notes influence which colonies I raise daughters from. The sixth failure is confusing swarm prevention with endless disturbance. Every inspection costs time, breaks propolis seals, changes temperature, and risks injuring the queen. I inspect with a question. When the question is answered, I close the hive. My spring decision takes less than a minute once the brood nest is visible. Is the colony strong? Is the weather settled? Does the queen have connected drawn space? Are charged queen cells absent? If one answer is no, I do not force the method. If all 4 answers are yes, one carefully placed frame may give the colony room exactly where its biology can use it. That does not guarantee a swarm-free season. No honest beekeeper can promise that. It does turn swarm control from a desperate reaction into an informed, early decision. Room above is not always room within. The colony that taught me this lesson finally came down from the elm in a cardboard box after sunset. I recovered the bees, but the spring flow did not wait for them to rebuild. Since then, I still add supers, still watch queen cells, and still make splits when needed. I simply begin one step earlier by reading the architecture of the brood nest. Look for strong growth, settled weather, known drawn comb, and no sign of commitment. Open one lane, preserve brood warmth, write down what you changed, and return to see what the bees did with it. Before we finish, let me show you how these decisions look across 3 colonies on the same spring morning. The weather is identical, the equipment is identical, and all 3 entrances look busy. Inside, they need 3 different decisions. Colony A covers 8 frames densely. Brood occupies 6 connected frames, the queen is laying well, and the outer brood edges are beginning to fill with nectar. I find no charged queen cells, the forecast is mild, and 1 clean frame of empty drawn comb is ready. That colony receives the modest adjustment. 1 mostly capped frame shifts outward, and 1 drawn frame goes beside active laying. I do not add a second gap. The first frame gives the queen immediate room without asking workers to heat an unnecessarily wide nest. Colony B looks just as busy at the entrance, but inside it has only 4 modest brood frames and fewer nurse bees. A warm afternoon has encouraged flight, yet 2 cold nights are still forecast. Its brood pattern is good, but the cluster is not large enough. That colony receives no internal gap. I close it, confirm food, and give it time to build naturally. Doing nothing is not neglect when the colony has already answered the question. Colony C is the strongest of the 3. Bees cover nearly every frame, nectar crowds the brood edges, and several queen cups contain larvae. That colony is no longer a simple prevention case. Its internal preparations tell me that 1 empty frame may be too little and too late. I decide whether to make a controlled split, remove a nucleus, manage the queen, or use another complete swarm control method. The exact choice depends on whether I want honey, increase, replacement queens, or simply to keep bees out of the neighbour's tree. 3 colonies, 1 morning, 3 decisions. Strength alone did not determine the answer. Stage, weather, and colony intent mattered together. This is why calendar recipes fail. They tell every hive to perform the same action while the hives are living at different biological moments. Good management is not doing more. It is choosing the smallest action that answers the condition in front of you. After an adjustment, I check the entrance before opening the hive again. Normal pollen traffic and steady flight tell me the colony is functioning, though they do not prove the queen used the new comb. At the next inspection, the inserted frame gives the clearest answer. Fresh eggs show recent queen activity. Young larvae show she accepted the laying several days earlier. Dense nurse coverage tells me the brood remains within the colony's thermal capacity. If eggs appear only on the warm side of the inserted frame, I note that pattern rather than widening the nest again. The bees may still be expanding into the frame gradually, especially when nights remain cool. If the new frame is packed with nectar instead of eggs, the colony may be backfilling faster than the queen can expand. That is useful information. It may indicate a strong incoming flow, restricted laying space elsewhere, queen trouble, or advancing swarm preparation. I inspect the surrounding frames and queen cell status before choosing the next step. If the queen has laid the new frame cleanly, I leave the colony alone long enough to benefit from the space I created. Reopening the brood chamber every 2 days does not improve the decision. It only adds disturbance and increases the chance of damaging the queen. I give the colony enough time to reveal a pattern, then compare that result with my note from the first visit. Records turn a vague memory into evidence. Colony strength, weather, inserted frame, queen cell status, and what happened 7 days later. Over several springs, those notes expose patterns that one dramatic swarm can hide. Some colonies repeatedly crowd the brood nest before the main flow. Others use vertical space readily and show little preparation under the same conditions. Management becomes easier when I know which behavior belongs to the season and which behavior follows a particular queen line. The method also changes with the equipment and climate. A single deep, double deep, or medium box system may place the brood boundary in different physical locations. I follow the brood, not the name printed on the box. In a cold climate, the safe window may arrive weeks later than it does in a warm valley. In an early, heavy flow, nectar may constrict laying space faster than the population alone would suggest. During a stop-and-start spring, repeated cold returns may make patience safer than aggressive expansion. The same principle survives those differences. Useful laying space must remain connected to the bees capable of heating and tending it. I also separate honey space management from brood space management. Supers matter, especially before a strong flow, but they solve a different part of the colony's problem. A colony may need both: storage above for incoming nectar and drawn space within for continued brood expansion. One does not automatically replace the other. When swarm cells are already advanced, I stop calling the job prevention. Clear language improves decisions. I choose a complete response, inspect on the correct schedule, and account for the old queen, developing queens, brood distribution, and colony population. Half a method creates false confidence. Removing visible cells without addressing the colony's condition can leave one hidden cell and the same swarm impulse. The lesson is not that every hive needs a frame inserted. The lesson is that the brood nest must be read before the obvious symptoms become the only thing we see. Strong colony, settled weather, known drawn comb, connected warmth, and no advanced commitment. Those are the conditions I want. One lane is an adjustment. Several random gaps are disruption. Write down what you changed, return at the proper interval, and let the bees show whether your reasoning was sound. I am Walt Dunmore. If you prefer beekeeping built on observation instead of calendar tricks, subscribe and meet me here for the next lesson.